Welcome everyone. Good evening. My name is Lynn Cornelius. I am a Greeley Creative District Board member and will be serving as the moderator for this evening's event. We have a panel of experts today representing creatives and the arts who will be discussing a number of topical questions guided by a facilitator. Participants are muted and won't show up on the videos this evening, but you may type in questions at any time via the chat button found in the navigation panel at the bottom of the screen. I'll be collecting questions and they will be presented in the last half hour to the artists for their responses. If you are a person of color or part of an underrepresented group, please type an asterisk by your question and I will prioritize those when we get to the Q&A portion. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can tonight. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the Greeley Creative District website. This webinar is presented by the Greeley Creative District, a nonprofit board whose mission is to highlight the community's distinctive creative identity and increase its economic vitality by uplifting, encouraging, incubating, promoting, and developing the arts and creative businesses in the Greeley community. You can find more about our board and the district at www.greeleycreativedistrict.org. That's greeleycreativedistrict.org. Our programming is also supported by Colorado Creative Industries. Okay, now I'd like to introduce Creative District Board Member Becky Safrick, who will be facilitating this discussion.
Good evening. I am so very pleased to be here with this very esteemed panel, and I think you're in for a terrific evening and some very challenging and interesting discussions. So welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining us, and thank you for our panel as well. When we discussed the opportunity to bring this discussion forward to the community, it was because, in part, one of the missions of the Greeley Creative District is to provide forums and opportunities for creatives to network, but also for the world to connect with us at different levels. And we have some, as I said, very special guests this evening that I think you'll find intriguing and challenging and will help all of us stretch a bit in the conversation that we're going to have this evening about this very incredible time in our history and our country right now. As Lynn noted, the first hour will involve the panelists we'll be presenting questions to them and they'll be responding. And then we will be inviting you to also have your questions addressed by those individuals. So to get started this evening, what I'd like to do is I will call on each of our panelists and ask them to provide just a very brief orientation to who they are, and then we will get into our questions. So as introductions go, I'll start with one of our local artists, Armando Silva. Can you introduce yourself, Armando?
Quick thumbs up from my fellow panelists here, if you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can.
Awesome, perfect. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Armando Ivan Silva Garcia. Born in Sombrerete, Zacatecas. Family moved to the United States in pursuit of that American dream. And I am super full of gratitude and thankful. And I also have the audacity to be chasing life as an artist to kind of make that American dream come true. So I'm an artist, but what does that mean, an artist? I'm a visual artist, so mostly murals, working with plastics, acrylics, aerosols, latex, pretty much anything that makes a mark. And if it kind of, makes me feel some, I'm gonna play with it. I'm gonna leave my mark if I can on a certain surface. I've been drawing since I was a little kid in my classes. It was kind of my first way to communicate with the English language, or with the American culture, if I may, as I was learning the English language. Drawing cartoons, finding a way to leverage myself and participation in small groups, whether that was in classrooms, communities, or even just with my teachers, to be honest. Grew up in Northern Colorado, got my bachelor's degree in fine arts out of the University of Northern Colorado. And just trying to out here live the art life as much as I can, and participate in community and uplift voices that maybe aren't always heard, or just maybe need to be heard or seen in a different way. And I can sometimes provide that through illustrations, or through some of the marks that I make on walls. So that's a little bit about me. If you want to know more about me, you can go to my website at armandosilva.com. And I'm sure you'll get to know more about me here as we continue through the conversation. So thank you for your time. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Armando. Betty, may we have you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Betty Hart. I am a theater artist. I've been here in Colorado for, it'll be 7 years next month. I turned 7. Before that, I worked in Atlanta. So this is actually the smallest place that I've lived because I grew up in Miami, moved to Atlanta, college in LA, then to London. So this is the smallest city that I've experienced. I am a theater artist. I'm both a director and an actor. I specialize in theater for youth, experiential theater, classics, and new work. That's kind of what I love to do the most, but I also do musicals occasionally because a girl's got to have fun. And I've been privileged to work at the Denver Center for the Performing Arts, the Arvada Center, Colorado Shakespeare Festival, Vintage Theater, among others. I am the artist who travels, so I've worked everywhere from Denver all the way to Colorado Springs to Boulder and back, have car, will travel. And I'm just really excited about the work that I do because I tend to do theater that has a message. I like to do a lot of social justice theater because I think it's necessary. And I think there's a specific power in having Black people be in the helm of pieces that are talking about social justice, especially here in Colorado where we are so in the minority. And I think that's a good start. Thanks.
Thank you, Betty. Appreciate that. Yvonne, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, thanks for having me, everybody. My name is Yvonne Garcia Bardwell, and I am the Community Relations Manager at Denver Botanic Gardens. I have been in Colorado for about 15 years now, and I'm originally from South Texas. I'm from McAllen. I was born and raised down there. I'm what they call, not a Texan, but I'm a Tejana, because you're down there, it's really Mexico. It's not Texas, it's Mexico. So I've been in Colorado for 15 years. I am just recently a new mom to a 4-month-old named Nayeli. And I love her to pieces. And my entire mind has shifted in the work that I do in terms of community organizing to what do I want to lead in terms of example for her, and how do I want to show her to be the best that she can be and bring people together and connect them however I can by using the gardens as a platform, or my just love and passion for my community. So I am really, really excited to be here. And this is actually my first panel. So I'm very, very honored that you guys thought of me and asked me to join and be a part of this conversation. So thanks to everybody.
Good. Oh, we're so happy to have you, Yvonne. Thank you for that introduction. And Justin, can you also offer a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Justin Kravitz. I was born in South Africa. I've been here in Greeley for 6 years now. I came over first as a professor in the School of Music at UNC. My instrument is the piano, so I'm a pianist, but really my identity is more one of a music educator. And I recently stepped into an administrative position, serving as the interim associate dean and helping to lead the anti-racism efforts within the College of Performing and Visual Arts. So again, thank you for including me on this panel.
Thank you. Well, I think you can see that we have an amazing and diverse group of artists that will be able to help us navigate this conversation this evening. And so we have about 5 questions that we'd like to ask the panelists. And what I'll do is ask the question, and then when each of you are ready to respond, if you can just raise your hand on screen so that I can call on you and we can get through those questions. So the first one, some of you tickled it a little bit, but can each of you give us a glimpse into your work? Particularly, what drives or motivates the work you engage in, and what do you hope your audiences or participants will experience? Who would like to start us out? Okay, Armando's smiling, so I'm just going to take that as a hand wave. Armando, will you lead us off?
I'm sorry. I feel like I'm on a game show in a way. So I'm just gonna start there, and can I have you just repeat the question, because it's kind of a lot, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So I want to make sure I kind of touch on everything.
Right. So again, give us a glimpse into your work. What drives or motivates the work you engage in, and what do you hope your audiences or participants will experience?
Awesome. And I hope that maybe just what I bring up here, that it turns into obviously a conversation within all of us, and I can just hopefully pass the baton to somebody else. But watch me fumble over some words here. So specifically what we're here for today, I for the longest time pushed away doing any work that resembled, I'll just say, Mexican culture, like, or my heritage or where I'm from or anything like that. And it's probably the same reason why I actually doubted myself or didn't even want to go into the arts to begin with, because I have it just like on this super high pedestal of what that stuff should look like. And as a kid, I was always drawing and, you know, just using it as something to kind of get by and to almost kind of just participate again with culture and community. But I always saw it as this kind of foreign language, as this like Egypt hieroglyphic sort of thing that I would never understand or be able to participate in as far as a career goes within, I'll just say within the arts in general, because I also dance, and it was something that I was like, like it's all the way in Los Angeles, or you like have to like look a certain way, or, you know, you have to like be, I don't have like hair, you have to like have hair and stuff to be like this actor or a dancer. So that's just kind of my lens looking at it to begin with. And as I've kind of trained myself and decided to kind of take some chances on some of the things that I loved and that I was going to school for, and so I was like, I might as well take action on some of these things. I noticed myself kind of like rising out of whatever it is, this field or this cake or this, you know, soup of ingredients of like, oh, before you know it, you are actually the person that's skillful enough or has all the tools to actually now curate, to actually you know, set a standard, to actually, or that people are actually looking at you to be like, hey, actually you fit this description, or you come from here, why aren't you engaging with any of those things? That voice was coming from within, but also from other community people as well. And so I started participating within my own culture a little bit more. And it's this weird feeling that I've always had, and I'm getting better at it now, of almost kind of culturally appropriating my own culture. And I know I'm talking about culture specifically at this moment, but I do think that there's a lot that has to do with that when we talk about skin color, when we talk about culture, when we talk about dance moves, when we talk about the way you dress, and like big companies taking over like a certain stitch, and now you can find it, you know, at a big box store, like just a bunch of things like that, right? And it's something that I felt like sacred to me, that I couldn't touch or play with or mix the paint or whatever that was. But the more that I've kind of gotten into my career and comfortable with myself and maybe my own skin and maybe my role within some of these things, the more that I'm like, no, this is actually on me. If I think of it so high up, then it's actually on me to start kind of expressing on why I think that way and starting to educate, call it my community, call it my peers, my surrounding, even my family and friends at some point, as to why these things are important in the way that I see them and almost kind of untouchable. And maybe start touching them a little bit and start sharing them with other people, almost like inviting somebody over for dinner and like, this is my mole that I made for you, and, you know, tell me what you think. And so, you know, somebody might ask for the recipe and you might be like, do I share it? Do I not? So I'm seeing myself as more of an advocate and as a way to translate, to transcend some of those ideas, some of those things that people are maybe gravitating, that is already probably within me, but I'm becoming okay with expressing it. Long story short, I'm just allowing myself to touch some of those things that I think are still so precious and still, I don't completely understand myself. So I'm getting to kind of, by having conversation with those, call it colors, call it subjects, call it recipes, or themes, the more that I start having conversations with, the more that I see it on myself as a responsibility to also then share it with others so that they understand how precious and how important those things are.
Very good. Thank you, Armando. Who else would like to answer? Yvonne.
Sorry, Betty. Just buzz in. That game show. I just would love, yeah, piggyback on what Armando is saying. I too, so I'll just kind of give a glimpse into my work. So I am a community relations manager at the Gardens. When I started there 9 years ago, I was an admin in the marketing department, and I saw that there was this disconnect. Not even disconnect, but there was no culture. There was no diversity in the Gardens. And I asked myself and I asked others, why don't we have, signage in Spanish? Why are our members mainly, white and affluent and older and are volunteer based? And so I just felt that there was this need for community organizing and to diversify the constituency of the Gardens. So that's kind of what I've been doing for the past 9 years. And what drove me to that, because when I started this work, I did 2 years of AmeriCorps before that, and then I was a waitress. And so I had no experience in this field at all. But I kind of did, because we grew up with family gatherings. We grew up getting together with your tios and your tias, and you come together and you'd break bread, you eat and, eat meals, and you talk about your day. And, it's just, this is what we did. And so it was always in me, but there was also this voice in my head. And that was my mother who would tell me, because I was supposed to stay home in Texas and never leave the nest. But she always used to tell me, nunca se te olvida de donde vienes. Never forget who you are. So that is kind of what drives me today, is that voice from her saying, you need to share your culture and you need to bring people together just the way we've always done, because people need it. I missed home when I moved here. I didn't have hardly any people that were like Armando, or they were just my white friends. And I'm like, I kind of miss my carne asadas, and I miss having these things to connect people, connect myself with. And so that's kind of what I've done over the years, is I've dedicated my time towards that. But that's kind of what I hope people get too, is that I've created a sense of home for them at the Gardens, that I've created this safe space for them to welcome them, so that they can bring their families and their escuincles, their kids, their aunts, their uncles, their grandmas, grandpas, and have that connection to plants, just the way we all have a connection to plants. So I want them to feel that this place is for them, and it's for anyone and everyone. So that's just a little bit about me and what drives me, and what I hope that the community gets from what I put out there.
Sense of belonging is very important. Betty, how about your perspective?
It's interesting what Yvonne just said, because there's so many things that ring true for me. As a theater artist, my mission is to help create safe spaces for necessary conversations. And those dialogues can center around who we are as individuals, who we desire to be as a community, how we can change longstanding behaviors to become more than we ever imagined. And I just believe that acting, directing, and facilitating are all tools that can help us, or at least help me, to be a change agent and a force for positivity, for creativity, for collaboration. And so that's kind of the why behind what I do. What I hope people get when they come see a show that I direct, or a piece that I'm acting in, or a workshop that I'm facilitating, is a few things. One, for them to gain empathy. I think that's what the arts does best. It helps to enhance empathy. I don't think it creates empathy. I think empathy is already there, but I think we reawaken it. We remind people that it's in them. And suddenly, as they're going on a journey with someone else, they're putting themselves in that person's shoes, and suddenly they're thinking differently. And now there's less other and there's more us. That's that's really what my work is about. And I think that if you experience something profound, whether it be in the visual medium or in music or theater or dance, you want to talk about it. You want to share that aha moment. And sometimes, especially for verbal processors, you can't even figure it out until the words come out of your mouth. And then you heard it and you said, that's it. That's the moment. And so creating spaces where people can have those conversations, where they can both be impacted by the art and then have a conversation about it afterward, is really what I'm about as an artist. And I find that post-show conversations can either be the most painful experience in your life, or they can be the most profound. And the ones that I do tend to be on the profound side and hopefully not on the painful side. So that's what excites me about the work that I do. And it gives me a chance to be more than I am as an individual, because I work with others and their creativity, their ingenuity, their lived experiences help me discover more about life than I would as a solitary artist.
What an evolution. Thank you, Betty. That was wonderful. Justin, what motivates the work you engage in?
Yeah, so I mean, what Betty shared about enhancing empathy or activating empathy, I think is key in my performance work as a classical pianist. Something kind of stale and repeating works that have been composed many years before and have been shared many times. Very often, I have aimed in the way that I present those to draw connections for the audience between the music and the context of its composition and the stories of the composers who wrote those works, and the experience of the folks in the audience. So that can be simply drawing the audience's attention to the fact that the composer, when they composed this work, was a refugee, so that they can start to consider refugees in their own context in a different light after being so moved by a piece of music. If it means drawing the audience's attention to the fact that this composer was actually incarcerated at some point in his life. So starting to activate that empathy for others who we often have preconceptions about. And I guess from the arts education perspective, what's really important to me is trying to cultivate artist citizens, recognizing that as artists, we are part of the world we create in, and that we have a responsibility to use our craft to better the society that we move in.
That's a hopeful thought. Thank you, Justin. And I think when I think of artists, I think of how personal artist expressions are and what you bring to everything that you do individually. And so with this next question, we'd like to talk a little bit about bias. How you think that the power of color and culture in the arts can be better appreciated? Where does bias show up? What gets in the way? What needs to change? Some thoughts about that. Who would like to start? Justin.
Well, so I might start off by sharing that before I moved to Colorado, I had never had my whiteness questioned. So just putting that out there. But I think as kind of the person who, on this panel is most active in an educational context, I have to put it out there that the route for change is through education. And I think we have to take a hard look at curriculum, both in the K-12 system, in the university system, and think about what we give space to, what we privilege in the systems that we use to tell people what's important, which artists we consider, which artworks we study, and recognize that any space that we accord to a subject in a classroom, that shows our values, shows our priorities. So I think in the context of education, and there's a lot of educating that happens through the arts, as Betty pointed out, helping people to consider history from multiple perspectives, and addressing the historiography. So how have we constructed this history, this story that we're telling? Whose perspectives are we using? Who are we privileging, and who are we suppressing through those stories?
Very powerful. Who'd like to go next?
I'll dive in.
Thank you, Betty.
I'll just start off by saying that all of your questions are like each worth an hour, so I can't answer all of them in that one question. It's just too much. But I'll just start off by saying that bias shows up everywhere in the arts. When you think about who owns the galleries and the theaters and the symphonies, who are the people in charge, you start right there. There's bias. And I think it's important to note, because sometimes when you talk about bias, people have some real visceral responses to it. So with my educator hat, I just want to make sure everyone knows that, one, everyone has bias. The only people who don't have bias are the dead or those in comas who were praying to return to a place of bias, right? So just have to say that, because the prevailing thought is, I don't have bias, I'm a good person. And so, and I get to do that work. I get to do workshops helping people recognize our bias, because if we recognize our bias, then we can make decisions about what we want to do with it. So bias isn't the issue, it's unmanaged bias. It's just bias run wild, that's the problem. And so, you know, it shows up when I go to an audition and people look at me and say, why are you here? And I say, because I'm auditioning. And they say, but it's not a Black role. That's how bias shows up. I moved from Atlanta, where the only Black role I did was Tituba. Everything else were roles that I guess other people would consider white roles, certainly in the Shakespearean canon, when I played Portia from The Merchant of Venice, when I was Doreen in Tartuffe. Like, it was just established in Atlanta. I played, you know, Helen of Troy. I was an actor, I could go. But when I came to Colorado, I discovered that I was no longer an actor, I was a Black actor. And they meant that in a limiting fashion, so that they would only call me in if the role was designated Black. So another way that bias shows up in the theater is that the default is white. When people read roles and it doesn't specify who is supposed to be playing those roles, the default is white. And so unless you either have a really open-minded director, then that's the way it works. So bias shows up in all kinds of places, and it's disheartening, it's unfortunate, because the truth is, when you bring people of color into the mix, you cause people to hear it differently. There's a different rhythm, there's a different cadence. Just because it's coming out of my mouth, it causes you to think a little differently. Maybe the next time you see someone, you'll say, oh, right, they too could be, as opposed to limiting. So I think it's super important to talk about it. It's something people don't like talking about. And that's part of the conversations that I love having. I love this stuff. Like, I'm the weird person who wanted to talk about race when I was a teenager. And everyone was like, why? Why do we want to talk about differences? And I was like, because it's so cool. I grew up in Miami with like literally 20 different cultures all around me. It was normal to talk about differences. Kids talked about differences, and it was never a problem. We enjoy talking about the differences in our skin colors and our textures and the dialects that we spoke with and the foods that we ate. We saw it as a celebration. It was very interesting to me to discover that there was a whole other group of people who see difference as negative. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of what the conversation needs to shift to, that we like differences when we think about all the different food choices we can eat. Why then would we not like differences in all the people that we have a chance to encounter?
Very fascinating. Yeah, Justin, would you like to
I just, on Betty's point, it was so striking to me moving from South Africa, where we have very open conversations about race, acknowledging race. I mean, there are huge racial disparities, but it's part of the daily conversation. And arriving in the United States and feeling like it was absolutely taboo to even acknowledge race. And how do you start to deal with the inequities if you can't even talk about race existing? Yeah. So, yeah.
kind of what is polite conversation, and sometimes race isn't included in that. Armando or Yvonne, anything you'd like to contribute to the conversation? Yeah, Armando.
So I don't know how far I'll go with any of this stuff, but I just see bias as a form of control, you know, as a form of comfort. It's a way where we can, you know, build the box up or the fence, or, you know, it needs to kind of look like this in order for me to digest it or understand it. And I don't know where to, you know, kind of, I'm not here to kind of give answers in a way, more just to kind of poke at things like, do you see this over here? It's more of that. But I just want to agree with what Justin said. It's how we educate ourselves. It's our experiences. It's our exposure to wounds that maybe we have. You know, I always think of myself being broken and trying to be fixed with kind of every day that I get to make an attempt at fixing things. And so I think a lot of the bias is that idea that I don't need fixing, that I'm okay, that this is the correct way. And so, yeah, and just also applauding everything Betty said, and right there with all of those things. And to also just champion the idea that it's not just black and white, that there's this big spectrum of like intimate little bias moments that you can have, that it's not just, you know, being on that side of the street or this one. It's every day. It's how you move, how you breathe, who you talk with. And it's okay, but yeah, I can't say it any better than they already did. So really good stuff.
Good thing. Yvonne, something to add?
I would just add that I've met a lot of friends or people that are activists, and they talk about this, and I would just add, I want to educate people. I want to bring them to the table and have conversations, even if they're tough. But I've had friends that say it's not my job to educate. But, which I get, like, and I respect that, but I feel like there is a little bit of, it is our role to help bring people to the table, especially if we're passionate about this work. And maybe we all do come from, you know, I'm like Betty, where I came from South Texas and everybody was Latino and Latina. And then I come here and somebody says, oh, you speak English really well. You're like, oh, thanks, I guess.
Is that a compliment?
Right. Is that a compliment? Thanks. Okay. But I just, like, I know she didn't mean anything. I mean, she wasn't trying to be rude. She came off rude, but then she didn't quite understand. So let me give her a little bit of an explanation of where South Texas is and where I come from, and that it is Texas, and I'm third generation American, and I am bilingual, and enlighten her in some way. And I know that that's kind of how I feel things are going to change if we actively decide to say we need to educate everyone around us for the better good of it just needs to happen for the betterment of everyone, right? So I'm not saying we need to give them diversity training 101, but if we can give them bits of tidbits of information about the culture, I think it helps, and it's a start.
Sort of makes me think. Yeah, go ahead, Betty.
Sorry, Becky. You know, I love what you just said, Yvonne, and it is such a challenge in the community, because you literally have one group of us who are like, let's have the conversation. I'll be a part of it. And we also have another group of people who are like, I've been having the conversation, attempting to have the conversation, and now I'm done. I'm done with y'all. Do the work, read the books, right? Mm-hmm. And I think in terms of what needs to change is the ideology needs to change, right? I think there's a very big difference in, ooh, Armando, you said mole. What kind of mole do you cook? Like, that is a conversation Armando's going to lean into, right? Which is a little different from, mole, what's mole? That sounds like, right? It's the attitude with which we approach it that has to change. I think more people would be willing to lean in if there was a genuine hunger for knowledge and for empathy. But I think if it becomes this really strange thing where it's like, this is the pet idea, and I want to trot out someone who's different to provoke conversation, I don't think anyone has time for that. And so I think, you know, there's room on both sides for the let's have a conversation and no, not today. And, you know, on behalf of everyone in the panel, for all of us who've heard that we're so articulate or that we speak English or any of those foolish things, you know, I want to let people know that the problem with those comments, because you're like, it's a compliment, that what you're not hearing is the ellipsis, which is for a person of color. That's what the problem is. It isn't that you're complimenting someone on their intelligence or their articulation. The problem is that you don't say the same thing when someone who's a part of the dominant culture does the same. And that's the issue. I just think people need to know, because they're always like, but you are articulate. What's that? Why is that a problem? If you don't say it to your white counterparts who are super brilliant speakers, then don't say it to us.
That's a really important thing. I think the two takeaways from much of what you said is, like Justin said too, there may be teachable moments, but they come in context, and it's important to understand how the intention behind the question comes. And also to Yvonne's point too about being aware of what a bystander role is. Don't be a bystander if there's an opportunity, but don't assume that it's your mantle to carry for all time. I'm going to remind those that are tuning into this conversation that anytime you want, you can chat in a question that we will pose to the panelists at the end of this session. So feel free to do that. And we've got a couple more questions for them right now. I'm going to turn the conversation a little bit from pandemic to protests. We are in a very challenging time, but it offers a way for us to hold up a mirror and take a look at ourselves as well. Probably the analogy for all of these, whether it's the COVID or whether it's the calls for social reform, is there's the common element that folks are finding it hard to breathe right now on lots of levels. How can the arts help interpret what's going on in our world right now? What role can it play to help us make sense of what seems very confusing, scary, uncertain? Armando.
So just to, as a blanket statement, the arts are essential. The arts are needed. The arts are expression. The arts are a sense of, they provide a sense of belonging. They provide a platform. It's an exercise, like talking, like breathing, like using our senses. You know, those of us that are, you know, fortunate enough to be able to do most of them, that's where I want to start. So by saying that, I think sometimes we think of the arts, and maybe sometimes even under this platform of, you know, the creative district and some of the purposes that maybe this webinar is supposed to kind of maybe push towards. And it's not always, well, it should hardly ever be economic. It should be, you know, insular, and then it should be shared, and it should be, it should be critiqued, but it should also be amplified, and it should also be intimate and quiet and private. But it should be encouraged, I think, is probably the biggest word that I can get to, is that it should be encouraged. It should be available, and it should be shared. I think that's kind of where I start with a lot of those things, because that connects us. That allows us to kind of spread seeds, and then some of these ideas, expressions, for them to grow into other, you know, beautiful X, whatever they are, into other people's souls and lives. But yeah, they're essential, they're necessary. So that's why maybe I'll start there.
Mm-hmm. Especially at this point in time. Other thoughts about how we interpret this time in our history and what's going on? How can the arts help us with that? Yvonne.
I'll speak from a garden perspective and a museum. I think we need to be more intentional about who we're asking to come to our talks, our events, we need to, I'll just say, I've had conversations with staff just recently about this. Just they want to feel heard. We need to invest our time in our staff and the people of color within the staff, because they are out there in the communities protesting. They're a part of everything that's happening. And I think that that it's important that we recognize that they come to a place like the gardens and feel welcome in that space and included and safe. And so we can't just ignore their concerns. We have to reach out to them and ask them, how are you feeling? How are you doing? What do you need? How can we provide whatever it is that you need? And so I don't necessarily know if that's answering your question, if that's answering like what it is, but what you're looking for. But I think for the gardens and from the art that we do, it's like we need to invest, we need to look inward, right? We need to ask within staff, what is it that you need? And let them decide and help us and each other navigate the next steps of just art displays, vendors, exhibitions, things like that. I just think that that's where how I see this.
Mm-hmm.
So
good, thanks. Betty.
I want to just echo Armando for a moment. The arts are essential, and they're life-giving. And I kind of want to talk about it in a couple different contexts. So, when we first began to enter into the pandemic and we all suddenly discovered that we were stuck at home, what happened? People discovered that they were craving artistic outlets. Everybody was talking on social media about what show they were watching, and then everybody would go watch that show, and then this whole conversation about that. And then people began to say, as much as we were watching television and the beauty of Netflix and all those others, they were missing the live. They were missing being able to breathe with others and being able to walk up to someone and hear a stranger give an insight about a mural. And there was this hunger. And that's because something is missing when the arts aren't with us. And I think it's interesting that when it's with us and you have access to it all the time, I think it's human nature to kind of get spoiled and go, it's not a big deal, it's an artist, right? But as soon as it was taken off the table, guess what? The whole world began to realize how necessary we are. In terms of interpreting history, I'll tell you, I'm a Black woman who has not had any negative encounters with the police. My encounters with the police have been pleasant. Some have been flirtatious. I have not had any negatives whatsoever. When I talk to my brothers, however, I hear a different story. And they, through their words, paint a picture to help me understand the didactic words that I can read about in the New York Times or read in any of our great authors. But when they tell me the story, it changes something. For example, I have 3 nephews. The oldest one just turned 18 and just graduated from high school. I'll never forget being with them one December, shopping with them, right? Getting them to go get Christmas presents for their parents. I'm a good aunt. I was teaching them that they need to do this. And we went shopping and the person said, do you want a receipt? And I'm all environmental Betty. No, I don't want a receipt. And the boys all said, no, auntie, we have to get a receipt. If we have a bag, we have to get a receipt. And I was, the environmentalist, I was like, the paper, we don't need it. No. It had nothing to do with that. They knew, because my brother had taught them and they'd already experienced this in their young lives, that because they were Black young men, they were at greater risk for being stopped and accused for stealing. And so they knew to always have a receipt so that would not end up in a negative outcome.
Tough.
That's what the arts do. It allows you to reinterpret something that you thought was standard or normal and see it from another lens. Now, I don't question if they say they want receipts. I'll never look at a receipt the same way, even though that wasn't my experience. That's what the arts does. So whether you came into the conversation at the beginning of this year and you said, what, it's America, it's a post-racial society, we don't have any race problems, right? as many of you were saying to us when we knew better, I got to direct a show called The Scottsboro Boys, which is a musical that's set in 1931 that shines a light on history in this country where 9 African-American youth didn't make it to their destination because 2 white women accused them of rape. Now, I'll tell you that it happened in the South, and for some of you, that'll make you say, oh, well, of course, it was the South. But what I want you to know is that as we worked on that show, none of the gentlemen who were in it were thinking about the South. They saw the echoes in 2020 before George Floyd. They knew about it before Breonna Taylor. They knew about it before Ahmaud Arbery, before we reopened conversations about Elijah McClain. They knew that a story that was set in 1931 was still current today, that history wasn't the past for them. And that's what the arts allows us to do. And I do believe that the people who saw that show changed. It changed how they looked at Black men because suddenly they were more than whatever images they had had in the past. And I think that's what art does. It changes how we see men, women, our trans brothers and sisters, our LGBTQ community, and all the different races and cultures you can think of. It causes a heart change that can lead to a head change.
Helps us interpret, helps us translate. Very thoughtful. Thank you, Betty. Justin, do you have anything to add?
Well, I mean, just to reiterate some of what my fellow panelists have said, you know, thinking about how arts can help interpret this time, I think the arts help us interpret any time in which they're created. They are an externalization of the experience of the creators. So, you know, the impulses that are behind the art that's being created now, it is subject to interpretation with respect to the world as it is right now. And it gives insight into people's personal experiences of this pandemic. It's one thing to read the headlines and keep track of the death counts, and I think it's another thing entirely to feel that you have a personal window into someone's experience, that you have a sense of what they were actually feeling through the work that they create, and you know that goes back to what Betty said about experience changing how we see things. It goes back to what Yvonne was talking about being intentional in how we externalize the impulses that we feel, being intentional about who we are trying to connect with through our artwork and how we try to connect with them. And it goes back to Armando's point about the crucial role of the arts in our society, and how the arts are one of the most fundamentally human things that we engage in. Yeah.
That's a perfect segue into, as we talk about the time periods. Betty talked about the Scarborough Board, the 1930s events that are still relevant today. And as Justin talked about the context of time, I want to have us reflect a little bit about some of the fact that historic and representative installations by artists have been the targets of vandalism or reinterpretation in some ways. One that comes to mind is a statue of Abraham Lincoln, Emancipation, holding the Emancipation Declaration. At his feet is a Black slave who is unshackled but is rising to freedom. That has been the subject of a great deal of debate by a couple of generations. One, the current generation, who sees it as demeaning as a statue. Others who point out that slaves helped buy and fund the original installation, who feel there's an important aspect of history that's involved with that. Talk to me about how you are viewing some of the current artworks that were previously in a different time context, and that are the subject of some debate about whether they should be removed or destroyed or reinterpreted. Any thoughts about how we work through those as artists? Armando.
So I guess I'm the public art person here. I'll kind of speak in two different hats, if I may. So growing up, again, coming from Mexico and coming to the United States, and again, that idea of MTV, pop culture, founding fathers, textbooks, geography, learning about dinosaurs, like Jurassic Park, like all of those things for me are just assimilating into what the culture is here, right? And don't ask questions, but they're pretty like well branded into what this is all looking like today, right? And so I'm by no means saying don't take the statues down, because I don't understand. I'm gonna say that to start off. I don't understand what those things mean, from how much hurt they cause by looking at them and all of that representation. I can't place myself in those shoes, but I also can't place myself in the shoes of like, this is mine and this is who I am and they are heroes to me. I'm in a way kind of Switzerland with all of it. It's they're rocks to me, and it's the way that and the reason I say all of this is it's the same way that I look at some of my work. It's created, it's meant for a moment. I don't create the work all completely myself. A lot of it is, through applications, through funding of other platforms or projects. And so, yes, they are reminders of times that were not, they were not anything. They were, on the contrary, they were super negative to a lot of people, and they are reminders of those things. And so I have empathy for that, and I can rally behind that does cause a ton of hurt. And so I almost kind of say it's not up to me, but I can support those that are hurting, because I know things that I've gone through that hurt me. And if I could communicate that to others and understand and make them not only understand, but communicate, express to them as far as what those intentions were and what they're coming from, and have a level-headed conversation with a lot of those things, then it just makes sense. I tend to kind of always just come back to the middle with a lot of these things. But I'll kind of, and I know I went all over the place, but I'll come back to maybe me as a public artist and how I even engage and move through some of these things, as to maybe try to get an understanding of how maybe these things were once created, or maybe where they're maybe continue to be created nowadays, right? And kind of pulling back the curtain here a little bit. So for me to get a start as a public artist, as a muralist, and this is probably another reason why I was so hesitant to even touch anything that resembled I'm from Mexico. The first public piece that I did here in Greeley was that of a white man. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't by an accident. That was because this is what's going to be accepted in this community for the most part. I love Albert Einstein, don't get me wrong. That guy like rocked it and did it the whole time for science. Like, I'm not saying none of that, but it was a move that I made to build leverage. It was a move that I made to become closer to the middle and allow myself to participate within a community, to kind of put some of my own things to the side that I kind of, do I want to like yell and scream, hey, I'm this, and I love Frida Kahlo, and I would love to like, pay homage to that or something like that. Yes, but I mean, it just speaks to how some of those things get approved and how some of those things happen, and how sometimes I myself have played into some of that, and as I'm growing and I'm learning and I'm falling and I'm picking myself back up and I'm checking myself again to be like, one, you don't have to continue to do that. Two, you can embrace more of who you are and hopefully allow some more people to accept you and some of those things that you have to cheer for and celebrate. But it does, I don't know, sometimes just requires you having to go to the middle. I think it goes back to Betty's statement a little bit, and I'll wrap this up here. It's the attitude in which you approach some of these things and you engage and ask questions about them and participate. So I know I like fireworks with my talk in here. But
That's what we love about you, Armando. Thank you. Yvonne.
I actually had this conversation with a friend earlier today, and the first thing that came to mind was like, we should take all of these statues and make a museum out of it. And we can't erase it. It's part of history, and I think it's important that our kids learn about it, as ugly as it may be. And I was like, but that's going to take a lot of land because these things are huge. Like, they're not small little pieces, they're huge. But then she said something to me that I thought was even better than that. And she said, what if you turned the art into other art? And what if you melted that bronze and made it into a beautiful statue that's more empowering and beautiful and speaks to the culture today? And I thought, yeah, that's what we need to do. Like, but we also need to like have a little bit of like education in there so that people remember what it once was, and then turn it into something better and greater for the next 100 years.
Very cool. Justin.
Yeah, I love that idea. I also wonder if there are various ways of recycling the art and reusing it, and if you could make, if it's possible to make another artwork by adding onto and adjusting in ways that don't necessarily destroy the original, but completely change how it's viewed. So I also, and I completely agree with Yvonne, like some things we may not want to stand in perpetuity, but future generations need to know what was valued at that time, at the time that these statues were erected. So definitely necessary to preserve them. And I'm trying to think. I mean, the other kind of lamer strategy, in a way, would be to have a plaque by a statue that you're allowed to stand that gives a little bit more contemporary context to what the public is seeing when they encounter a piece of public art. So.
Sometimes need to look back to see if we've made the progress we hope we have. Or
Right.
Betty.
You know, it's interesting. I don't have a lot of points of view about visual art because I don't do it. So I kind of don't spend a lot of time deciding what should or shouldn't be done. But I'll just ask this question. In theater, nothing lasts forever. So why must any piece of art last forever? That's the question I would ask. I know you'll say to me, but what about Picasso? Okay, but, and don't get me wrong, I love museums, but that's just kind of my question of, you know, do all of the statues need to be here forever is a question. I don't know.
Well, Armando seems to have a question to ask back. So Armando.
No, but man, like I get done with the piece and I'm like, get rid of it. Take it as far away from me as possible. And I know that these are only like 4 points of views, because I know there are some artists that is like, no, like this is the grail. This is like my tombstone or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? This is my 9th symphony or whatever that might be. And you don't even get to decide if it's your 9th symphony. Sometimes it's what ends up happening.
Right.
And so I think from a working artist, let's put it this way, a lot of the work that maybe we're involved in or participate with, the value or the message or the context or content that it turns into is so much out of our hands. And I think sometimes, I don't think we're embarrassed by it, but I think we're always growing, knock on wood. And, you know, when we get, like I just said, when we get done with the piece and we move into something else, we want to evolve, we want to grow. And I think it speaks to that sentiment, Betty, of like, it doesn't have, like, it's not forever. It was a moment, it was an expression, it was like a flame in a way, right? And now it's gone, and there should be now a new flame, and tell that story.
You know, it seems in so many ways from Betty, what you had shared with us earlier about the performing arts is that you're constantly reinterpreting and bringing forward a new way to express a previous context or a story or a happening. And so that ever evolving piece of it is perhaps more natural for you than for visual artists who are going on to the next piece and maybe ready to let one go, but it's not there yet. Yeah, Armando, another thought.
Just super quick, because I know we have like art education kind of here. It's a little bit of juxtaposition of like really work on your artist statement and what this means and where you're coming from the standpoint of like educating your audience and your viewers and everything like that, whether that's the pamphlet or walking into a gallery or your YouTube video now or your Instagram post. But at the end of the day, 100 people will walk by or listen to it and be like, no, that's actually about this. And you're like, well, okay, then it's about blue. I don't know.
Well, we know culinary artists, their work is consumed right away, and we're glad that they do what they do. So we had a fifth question, but so many of you have responded to that. I'm going to throw a curveball at you and ask you a completely different question, and then we'll get to the ones that folks have typed in. My question to you is, where does conflict belong in the arts? Where does conflict belong in the arts? Armando.
Well, I want to ask what conflict and who are the characters in this story, right? But I would say it belongs in all of it, the beginning, middle, and the end. Because like the struggle, the conflict, the friction, again, brings evolution, brings understanding, brings this new level of like hopefully moving on, or even if you don't move on, you take your scars and your wounds from that friction or the conflict to go on to the next thing, or to go talk to the next person, or to make the next painting or the next show.
Very good. Justin.
Yeah, so I love that, and acknowledging the kind of internal conflict that goes into creating a work of art. But I just wanted to respond maybe from the point of view of conflict between an artist and the artwork and the audience, potentially. And just to point out that we often forget, especially in like the classical arts, high arts, right, like classical music and painting, we forget that the arts fundamentally are a form of entertainment. So because of that, they offer this really unique avenue for engaging people on difficult subjects, for challenging people, for offering viewpoints that are in conflict with an audience member's preconceptions, in a way that people may be receptive to, and in a way that dealing with topics that people may have been resistant to engage with through a different format. So,
very good thought. Betty or Yvonne?
Conflict is part of the definition of a play. So it has a place. It always will. Your great works of art use that conflict to do something strategic. So I think conflict is a part of the work. I think what I'm curious about, Becky, and it kind of goes to what Armando said, is, when you're saying conflict, what do you mean? Because there's all kinds of different things that we could delve into with that, but just conflict in general has a place in the arts. If you want to be a little more specific, we can talk.
So I'll add to that, because thank you for that question about clarification. When I think of conflict, I think of the time we're in right now, where we are viewing conflict as a negative. We're having trouble communicating to each other. We're having difficulty with our health and our economic system. But in so many ways, you all have talked about conflict as an avenue to change and evolve, interpret, communicate. And in some ways, it sounds like conflict is necessary for the work you do. So that is my reason for the question, and I think you've covered that ground very well. Yvonne, anything you wanted to add to that?
Just that conflict drives me. It's a motivator. It fuels me. It's like, oh, that's an issue? Well, all right, let's figure this out. All right, we all deal with it. And I think as a Latina, it's like challenge accepted. You're going to tell me I can't? I'm going to show you that I can.
It is a motivator. Yeah, Betty.
And I would just say that, and I could be wrong, but I don't think there is an artist who doesn't have to deal with the internal conflict. I mean, I think that's what's interesting. I think that the conflict that we wrestle with, whether it be self-esteem or our place in society or any of these things that we wrestle with, it's part of that allows you all to experience what you experience. We write about it, we sing about it, we play it, we draw it. You don't know that when you're experiencing it, but that's part of the genesis, because we're wrestling with things about the world around us daily.
Exactly. Not everything is a barbershop quartet harmony. So at this point, I know we have some questions that folks who are viewing would like to ask you. So I'll turn it over to Lynn to share those questions, and we'll do the same sort of checking in with each other. Lynn?
Okay, thank you. So this is not a question, but there's several comments in here that I think could be springboards for discussion. This is from Fatima. Betty, you said something so real. Depending on where you are, the conversation about differences and different cultures and languages takes another route. Smaller places, I think, tend to be more limited. When people are exposed to several different cultures and food and languages, of course you talk about those differences, and it's not a big deal. I'm enjoying this talk very much, by the way. I work for a community health center, Sunrise, and I know the importance of being exposed to art or being an artist and to health. Thank you all for the positive contributions you make in our community.
That's wonderful. Any reactions? Yeah, Armando.
I don't think, well, I don't have it, but I'm recovering. I had COVID at the end of March. And I'm open about it and I talk about it because it literally affects me as far as being able to work, being able to process, being able to be present, be alive. And so I wanted to actually bring this up before the comment even came up, that we have to remember that I think even just as artists in general, and maybe specifically when you're being called out because of where you come from, your skin color, your language, whatever, like description, like your sexuality, you're being called out specifically for that reason, other than it's almost like that first and then you're an artist. I think there's this weight, there's this responsibility that's then placed upon you to, again, almost kind of speak for all. And as best as we try, and as best as I try to kind of, hey, this is just me, but also like, I know Juan and I know Debbie and I know all these people that are kind of experiencing some of these things, is you have to remember selfishly as a creative to pump the brakes and let yourself be human, to say no, or to say I'm sick. I can't do those 5 things, or I won't fill that role in a way. Even though the call for diversity is being asked at that point, it's okay for you to take a step back and for you to not have to carry that full weight.
Good thought. Anyone else want to offer a thought there?
And to clear that up, to not have to carry that full weight because of your health, because of the stress it brings, right? And because of all the residual that's going to come from a situation or a point like that.
Yeah, self-care is pretty critical for artists to continue what they're doing. I know we have some other questions. Lynn?
Okay, this is from Pam. I think the arts are so important to bringing cultures together. I'm very concerned about how our early education is now pulling back on teaching the arts to children because of funding issues. Your thoughts on how we turn that trend around?
I'll start. We look at the data that shows music is directly correlated to math. And if we live in a country, in a world that is more and more automated and needs computer skills, then we desperately need people who understand math, and thus we need people who understand music, because music is math. I'll just start there, pitching Justin's art form. But what I'll also say is that the world needs creative thinking. The ability to solve problems is what art does. When you get people together, whether it's to paint or to do a play or to create a piece of music, a choir singing together, all of that is strategic thinking and problem solving. And so I find it fascinating that the world is saying, gosh, we need more people who could think outside the box. I wonder why we don't have that much in this country. And then you say, but arts, we can't afford that. We can't afford not to. If you want sentient people who are empathetic and able to work with all kinds of people regardless of their differences, then you need the arts as a part of classroom education. And I think if you polled everyone on this panel, I bet all of us did get exposed to it when we were in elementary school. And here we are.
Absolutely. Good. Lynn, another question.
Okay, this is from Deb. Thank you so much, panelists. Wonder what is your favorite type of venue in which to perform, and how does a community create more of these spaces?
All right. Justin.
Sorry, having a little trouble unmuting myself. My favorite place to perform has typically been a very intimate venue, like a house concert venue, or a smaller recital where just with the context, the comparison, often as a pianist you're on a stage in a 400, 500 seat theater, and it's very difficult to have a personal connection with the audience members. One can talk to the audience, but there isn't that same kind of intimacy or connection that you can have in a smaller space. So I particularly enjoy that.
Good. Yvonne.
I'm biased, so a garden. And I'm not a performer, but we have partnered with SCFD organizations and invited them to do a showcase with us for the past 5 years. And what we do is we open up our space for them to come and showcase their art. And we have had ballets, we've had brass bands, we've had theater, just in different areas of the garden. And I just love that setting for them. And they do too. I mean, they truly enjoy being, because it's so peaceful and calming and relaxing, and it just really adds to the ambiance of being in the garden. So I think, not a performer, but I'd want to dance there all the time. And sing. I'd want to sing there too.
It's pretty special there. I can see why. Betty, how about you? You've been in a million places.
I don't have a favorite. Every performance venue has a different kind of charm. You know, to Yvonne's point, I got to work outdoors in Boulder, and that was fantastic and horrific because, you know, mosquitoes and snakes are real, y'all. So, you know, I think it just depends. You know, when we think about the beauty of the gardens, that's great. And I would love to perform in the Denver Botanic Gardens, but I will also say that performing in the wild of the Boulder was one of the craziest things I've ever done. And so I love a venue where there's just people who are ready to interact. You know, that's what I love. I just love a space that allows me to come into it and go, this is home. You know, whether it's home for one day or home for a month or two, that's it. I love, there's a value in all the performance spaces for me.
Very nice.
We don't have snakes. Maybe we do, but I've never seen them.
So. It wasn't meaning you, no, but we did this for the Catamounts. We did an immersive show in Boulder, and we had snakes, we had mosquitoes, we had people stealing stuff, like you name it, we had it. We were rained on, everything. And it was glorious work and awful work. Just depends on what part of the day.
Yeah, I bet so.
I want to invite you and Justin at any time to come to the gardens. Like, let's talk about how you can come perform.
There you go.
Okay. Showcase your art. So let's talk.
Please.
Yes.
Yes. Because I do love the Denver Botanic Gardens. It's so beautiful. So beautiful.
Armando's has done some installations in the gardens as well. Armando, you'll want to tell Yvonne that that's your favorite place too, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I didn't perform there, but I installed, and it was one of the first. So I talk about doors like opening up, and then it's kind of how you walk through it. You know, how you strut your way through this door, or if you're just like peeking in to see what's going on. And it was one of the first times, if not the first time, that I got to do an installation that wasn't just on a flat surface like a canvas or a wall. And I got to really, you know, ask some questions of myself of like, what does this mean? What does this look like? How do people, you know, experience it? So thinking about time, thinking about, you know, the sense of smell, also thinking about looking at it from the outside looking in. It was the bonsai garden, so it was great, and it's you know, given me an opportunity to grow. And I think those are probably my favorite venues, are those spots where you're like, how are we gonna do it here? Well, I don't know, but and this is also like another, just like a little pro tip for artists. Figure it out, guys. Like, don't be like, I've never done this before, I can't. Like, you probably can, and it'll probably be really awesome. Like, allow yourself to mess up, to, you know, to ask more questions, to engage with the people that are working there, and you'll be better for it.
Yeah, make friends with those snakes, gosh darn it. So, Lynn, you have another question for us.
Yes, this is from Brianna. Hi, everyone. I'd love to pose a question about hiring in arts spaces. What makes a job, gig, offer feel good for you individually when it's pitched to you? What's a red flag? What do you wish hiring committees and public art boards understood better about hiring diverse talent?
It's a big one. Armando.
I know that question all too well. It's not just okay to hire Black people during Black History Month. Let's start there. Same thing for Hispanics or whatever, Hispanic Heritage Month. Try to find people that excel at what they do, you know, and also let them know that yeah, you're a really awesome singer-songwriter. And then you build a connection, and then they'll present you to other awesome talent athletes. And then through that, your diversity portfolio will build up, and you'll be able to count on more people and not have to scramble to find the darker skin or the short person or the transgender during the time of, so on and so forth. And just be ready with what you want from them. I think a lot of times we try to play it too safe, like, could you maybe want to? I think sometimes just calling, you know, blue, the color blue, be like, hey, we want you because you look like this and this is what we have to offer you. Don't waste people's time. Like, that is the most precious thing. And then it's up to that person to say, that was offensive, or that let's talk about this, or you know what? Yeah, actually, I would really like to engage with you, but this is how we can maybe improve the matter. Or maybe at that point, that person might be like, you know what? Yeah, this is really important to me, and I need to really step up and be this person for this particular platform that you're engaging with. Having your ducks in a row and knowing what you want from somebody and being straight up with that up front is the most important thing.
Yvonne.
I have been a champion of this for a while within the institution, and that is, we need to reframe our job descriptions. We need to write it in a different way that is more welcoming and not elitist, because the way we write it for museum, it's museum speak. And I don't have that. I never had that experience. But I'm passionate about community. And so if somebody wrote in passion about community, I'd want to apply. But when you write that I have to have some sort of background in museum work or field or, you know, related work or experience, then it makes me feel like I can't. I don't have a connection to it, and I'm intimidated by it. So I think that we need to rewrite the job descriptions altogether. And what we need to do is we need to survey the staff that's doing the work and ask them directly, what do you do day to day? And from there, you start to write the skill sets needed for that particular job.
Mhm.
But I also think that who we're trying to hire, you should be mindful of that. If we're trying to bring in Latinos, we need to have this application in English and Spanish. We also need to make it accessible for them to apply and think about all the barriers that may exist. So if they don't have computers at home, well, then we need kiosks at the gardens for them to apply. Okay, or a day. So these things you need to kind of start thinking about, that it's not just, oh, we want to hire Latinos and it says bilingual in this, that's not going to bring in Latinos. Like, you need to think about other ways and think about all the barriers that may exist for them to apply for that position.
That's a good point. Justin?
Yeah, just to piggyback off that, it so often is presented as a pipeline issue, and that's just nonsense. That's just a way of perpetuating systemic bias, systemic racism and inequities that exist, and framing the job descriptions in the right way, being mindful of who your search committees consist of. Do they need bias training before embarking on the search? Those kinds of things are really important. And, working in an academic context, I can tell you are part of organizations that are really bulky and resistant to change. And it's so important that that people in levels of management really support inclusivity in hiring practices in order for change to occur.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just want to add a few things. What makes me feel good when I get an offer? When a producer knows something about my work, has seen it, has experienced it, has asked other people, and is coming to me because they know I am the answer to their problem, right? Because that's what hiring is. Hiring is an answer to a problem. So that's what makes me feel good. When someone comes to me and says, no, I really need you for this project. And yeah, we were thinking about this time slot, but if you're not available, we'll move the time slot because it's about you, not February, right? Those are things that make me feel good. Things that I want people to know is that if you have never had diverse voices as your artists, as your directors, then don't expect them to do what everyone else has done before. You're bringing in something different. I have a lot of peers who will say, and not just in Colorado, but in other cities around the country, well, they brought me in because they wanted something different, but then they wouldn't let me be different.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then don't hire somebody different, So I would say what makes me feel good is being seen and being valued for the work that I bring. And I want people to recognize that I might have a different style. And I think, what's interesting is that in art, we all know that there's a million different ways to do it. How about embrace the fact that we're going to try path 5,700 when you've only been in the teens and see what happens? I want you to give the support to artists of color that you would give to other artists. Too often you'll bring in an artist of color when there's a problem, but then you leave them to fend for themselves. But when everything is fine, you give them all the support and staffing. So those are all things I would love people to consider when they're talking about hiring that would make it a positive environment for both the institution and the artist.
Those are really great points, and it makes me think of a conversation that we've had on the Creative District Board several times. One is there's a difference between offering applications and actually recruiting artists, because one is a real compliment to we know what we're looking for. The other thing is that I think we have witnessed and tried to be advocates for making sure that artists get paid what they're due. One of the things that if I've heard it once, I've heard it a million times is, oh, we think we'd like this person, give this person an opportunity to do this for free for our organization. This will be great for their resume or their career building, and we all know better. There's a reason that there's a term called starving artists, and we don't want to, we want that to be an endangered species, not something that's really common. I think Lynn has another comment for us.
This is from Karina. Thank you, Yvonne and Betty, for doing this hard and needed work. Not only are you women, but women of color representing the now and the future.
Very nice. I have one last question for you, and then we'll wrap up. And this is really an opportunity for you to ask a question of each other. Do any of you on the panel have a question that you'd like to ask any of your other panelists that we didn't cover already?
I'll ask. Haha, Armando, I beat you. I would love to ask you all, what is something that people have told you or asked you that you never want to hear again? So it could be a microaggression, it could be whatever it is, but what is it you've heard enough that you just like never again, so you can help educate people so that perhaps they won't say that to you?
Justin.
I just, you know, as Becky was talking about people saying that, oh, would be so good for you. You know, I'll give you the opportunity that I mean, I didn't want to put my hand up again before she took back the mic, but that is something. And what, you know, is one thing for yourself, but I'm constantly approached by people looking for some of our student performers. And again, the assumption is that they would be doing them a favor by giving them a forum to perform and entertain them. Pisses me off.
Great. That was a challenging question Betty asked. Are there some others you never want to hear again?
Hello.
Why do you say Cancun and not Cancun? I'm tired of it. I say Cancun because it's Cancun.
Good. Okay, that works.
Are you the paint guy? Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. So Justin, Betty, Juan, and Becky, I'm sure you have these things, and Lynn. I get driven up a wall every now and again. I take them as opportunities to try to engage a little bit more. And usually what I end up finding out is a lot of the people asking these questions aren't sometimes really ready to hear the answer because they want to end the conversation pretty quick. So I'll still take it. I'll make it awkward. I'll make it weird and be like, yeah, actually, let's talk about this. And it's like, especially right now, I think. So I'll put my kind of frustrations to the side, and we'll come and talk about it in the green room when the show's over, but we'll take it.
Be careful what you ask for, huh? Well, I think that was a great question to end on, and a provocative one, Betty. I can't imagine why you would ask such a challenging question, given all that we've shared tonight. I want to thank our panelists. You have been absolutely candid and lovely and insightful. I don't think we could have asked for anything more, and I'm so grateful for your participation tonight. We are looking forward to Yvonne's invitation to come to the gardens and watch a play while Armando paints a mural and Justin plays the piano for us all. So again, Justin, thank you. Armando, thank you. Betty, wonderful to have you. Yvonne, thank you for your participation. Lynn is going to give our audience one last instruction about what they can expect to see on the screen as we close out. But with that, I'll turn it to Lynn.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone, and thanks to everyone who submitted questions and joined us this evening. The session will be posted on the Greeley Creative District website shortly. As the webinar ends, you'll immediately be directed to a short, 5-question survey. So please stay on the line until you see that, until you're directed to that. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.